Well, hello. Welcome to the Root Cause Medicine podcast. I'm your host for today, Dr. Kate Kresge, and we are interviewing Dr. Uma Naidoo. She's a Harvard trained psychiatrist who now specializes in nutritional and metabolic psychiatry. She's the author of This Is Your Brain on Food and Calm Your Mind with Food. She's an expert in using food and nutrients to treat mental health conditions, but she's also a chef. We learned tips and tricks from her today on how to truly heal your mind and your body so that you can heal from things like anxiety, depression, and more. Now, she gives us some practical tips and tricks, the ultimate lab panel to ask your doctor for before you go to your psychiatrist, how to find a psychiatrist who practices this type of medicine, and why certain food ingredients are important to consider in the treatment of things like anxiety and depression, whether it's fiber, magnesium, or things like ashwagandha, and even the role of leptin in regulating both mood and metabolism. You'll love learning from Dr. Naidoo today if you're someone who's looking to heal your own or someone else's mental health condition, or if you're a doctor who's looking to stay on the leading edge of nutritional psychiatry. I also want to thank one of our listeners, Linda, who left this really sweet review of the Root Cause Medicine podcast on Apple Podcasts recently. She says, "This podcast was amazing. I felt really encouraged as someone who struggled with indigestion for years and years. Some great practical advice, and I also learned a lot. So thankful for this platform. I have not heard an episode that's been a disappointment. They've all been great. Thank you, Linda. And I'm so grateful to hear that this is helping you. If you enjoy the Root Cause Medicine podcast, make sure to go leave us a 5-star review today and leave your comments. We truly do read them and really appreciate them. In case you didn't know, this podcast was created by Rupa Health. Rupa is the #1 place to order, manage, and track results from over 35 different lab companies in one single place for free. That's right. No more having to use multiple portals or logins ever again. If you're a practitioner, make sure you go sign up for free at rupahealth.com today. While you're there, you can check out our new features like the AI menu generator, lab shops, free live classes, and more. Now, let's start the show. Dr. Uma Naidoo, welcome to the Root Cause Medicine podcast.
Thanks so much, Kate. Really happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you here. You have such a cool and unique story and set of skills. And before we dive into your phenomenal books and have you give us all the tips and tricks for calming our mind and feeling our best, I actually wanted to hear a little bit about your story. What made you decide to go into psychiatry and then get your certifications as a nutritionist and chef?
I think it really goes back to my childhood. Food and science were very much a part of my background growing up. Despite all my so-called accolades, I was a preschool dropout, I like to tell people, because I refused to go to preschool. And I somehow got away with it. And this is because I wanted to spend time with my maternal grandmother, to whom my first book is dedicated. She was not only really cool, she was an excellent cook, and she was so much more fun than a lot of probably preschool at the time. But from her, I just naturally learned and absorbed healthy eating, watched her cook, pick fresh vegetables from the garden. I would help do little tasks. And then I'd sit down to a meal with her and we'd talk, we'd be engaged. My grandfather was around. And to occupy and entertain me, they taught me yoga and meditation. So all of these components were parts of me that I brought forward. And I really realized the gap early on in training that we were being taught to prescribe these heavy hitting medications, some of which are life saving for my patients, but not everyone needs a medication. And when we were prescribing it, no one was asking, or we were sharing the side effects and giving them the information, but we were not really addressing lifestyle factors. Like, if this medication could cause weight gain, here are some things you could do, or tell me a little bit about what you're eating. And I really felt that was a huge gap. This one thing led to another, and I felt that nutrition and filling that gap in, especially for patients, was empowering information that could help them adapt differently. The science of the microbiome was evolving, this connection between mood and food was happening. And so, in a very wonderful way, it started to come together for me without any planning. And culinary school was really an ode to my food hero, Julia Child. When I realized, as I read her books and worked through her recipes, that she's known for her culinary career, but she actually had an entire life before that and career. So I thought, well, why not me? I love cooking and I want to learn more. And so I did it really to honor that. And I'm so delighted It was one of the best experiences of my life, but it also helps me to interpret food in a particular way to someone who's really wanting to use nutrition as a pillar to bolster their mental health. So that's it in a very long nutshell.
I think it's fascinating. I really love actually chatting with psychiatrists who've gone down the route that you've gone down, where you're starting to look more at food and lifestyle, because there's usually a story there. There's usually a story about why people pick psychiatry to begin with. Why was that the specialty you chose?
I loved people and I love a sense of community and speaking to people. And I recognized early on in medical school that for me, the easiest part of studying and working in medicine was really engaging with people, like really hearing their story and understanding what they were asking, whether it was a medical issue, an orthopedic issue, whatever rotation I was on. I cared about that. And I realized that it was a skill that when I did do my psychiatry rotations, and I realized that it was a good fit for me and that it meant something to me to be able to help people in that way.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you're doing psychiatry, you start to realize the impact of food. Can you walk us through like what started to pop up for you in terms of some root causes of mental health conditions that maybe aren't talked about or even taught about so much, but you started to learn about along your journey that sort of drew you closer to food? What was surprising? What did you learn?
Early on, I had a patient who accused me of causing him to gain weight. And he returned to an appointment with me a week after his first appointment. So not only was it not me, as part of his online medical record, I knew that he had kind of struggled with his weight for a while. It wasn't the side effect of the SSRI. And he came in very irate. And I was a very timid, very junior resident, still studying, still learning. And he yelled at me and really took this up. But I noticed he had this massive cup of coffee in his hand, Dunkin' Donuts. Nothing about the coffee. It's one of our favorites in Boston. But it occurred to me he's drinking this massive cup of coffee, and I could see it was an iced coffee, so I could see through this 3 cup. And I said, "Well, what did you put in your coffee today?" I could see that it had milk in it. And he said, "Oh, but like this amount of the creamer, and I like this flavored creamer, and I put in, this number of packets of sugar." Or I asked for that number. So I said to him, "Well, let's break that down. Let's hold on for a second. And let's just look at the calories. I'm not a massive calorie counter, but let's just look at this." And I proved to him in that moment that he was consuming so many empty calories between the sugar and the ultra processed creamer, which was laden with high fructose corn syrup, that even before he ate breakfast, he was consuming a ton of empty calories. And his eyes lit up. It was almost like a light bulb moment for him, but that was such a pivotal point for me because I recognized by educating someone and teaching them a simple fact that he was all motivated to adjust and change and what could he do differently. And we went on to have a really good therapeutic relationship where we didn't need to increase the dose of these medications. But over time, he used lifestyle measures to exercise more, adjusted and made these tiny tweaks to his diet, which really helped him. That was, for me, a moment which helped me understand how empowering that knowledge can be. And the way that these points really speak to a root cause is that we know inflammation is now linked to conditions like depression, anxiety, cognitive disorders, and more. One of the big issues in the United States is the amount of sugar we consume, even in foods we don't recognize as being sweet. Savory foods like ketchup, pasta sauces, salad dressings are also very high in sugar, and you don't realize it. So we are consuming this in a way that we don't realize, which leads to inflammation and can worsen these conditions. So I think that one of the themes that kind of underlies these different cases or situations that I've dealt with clinically is the fact that it goes back to the food system. And while we may not be in a position to change the whole evolution of the food system, agriculture or farming practices, we can make different choices about where and how we obtain our food. And of that food, what we choose to consume. We can choose the ultra processed creamer and the pure cane sugar, or we can make healthy choices towards whole foods. And I think that becomes a very powerful through line in all of this work because what nutritional lifestyle and metabolic psychiatry is about is providing the overarching plan for any person, whatever you eat, whatever your preferences are, your likes and dislikes about food, maybe your allergies or intolerances, maybe you have celiac disease or something else. You can be part of this and you can get help to improve your mental health condition, whether it's anxiety from that I wrote about in Calm Your Mind with Food, or any of the other mental health conditions that I cover in This Is Your Brain on Food, because what you're eating can be edited and adjusted to a healthy baseline to improve your mental well-being. And within the overarching paradigm, there are different diets which may help with different conditions. So I just think that it's something that can help more people get to the root cause of what it is. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes it's food and dysbiosis and gut issues that can really make a difference to someone's symptoms.
You wrote a lot about the microbiome in many of your books, actually. I was actually listening to one of your books on audio, and I remember stopping at one of the parts where you were talking about the relationship between the amygdala in the brain and certain types of bugs in the gut, and how that alone might be playing a role in anxiety. I'm wondering if you could walk us through, I think so many of us here, microbiome, prebiotics, probiotics, take them, they're good for you. But the way you broke down the science and that connection was fascinating to me. And I would love if you could walk our listeners through that.
Sure. So, compared to when the science of the gut microbiome first started to where we are now, we understand a lot more. And we understand a lot more specifics about different gut microbes that can actually impact different conditions. The amygdala is sort of a flashpoint for anxiety in the brain. And now we know that there are certain gut microbes that can either positively or negatively impact the level of anxiety that you're feeling. So I think that just understanding that becomes hugely important, because the first and foremost point is that many people don't necessarily associate food with mental health conditions. They associate food with medical conditions like hypertension, diabetes, and others. They don't put together what it is related to. So, for example, GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. And when GABA levels are low, the amygdala can be more reactive. It triggers strong stress responses, even when they're not warranted. And your brain may be missing an important tool for keeping extreme moods and levels of anxiety under control, which then makes you feel more anxious. But GABA has been shown to be produced by certain gut microbes, one of them being Bifidobacterium adolensis. And so a gut imbalance that leads to a shortage of that species then leads to a shortage of GABA in the gut and the brain, and therefore leads to higher anxiety. So that's just one example where now we understand a few more specifics about that particular Bifidobacterium and how it can impact GABA. And what we're doing is we're uncovering more and more research that is specifically related to certain bacterial species. Because although the different types of microbes include archaea, protozoa, viruses, bacteria, and more, the ones that are most studied are usually the bacteria. So that's why we often in the research speak about things like Bacteroides and the different classifications of them.
It's a great thing. So I want to talk about anxiety because you have a book, This Is Your Brain on Food, that goes through so many of the mental health conditions that we commonly see in America: depression, PTSD, ADHD, OCD, anxiety, and more. And yet your newest book is called Calm Your Mind with Food. Why was it important for you to come out with a book that was so focused on calm and anxiety?
My first book was released at the beginning of the pandemic. And unbeknownst to me, the topics resonated with people because many were at home preparing their own meals or trying to find their way through what was going on, which, when we think about it, was pretty horrible at the time. I'm glad it's passed. But what it led to is a lot of uncapping of mental health issues and a real mental health crisis. We know that from the loneliness epidemic. We know that from the higher levels of suicide in different age groups, specifically younger people. and also the sporadic levels of suicide across all age groups that we're seeing, from celebrities to sports players to the everyday person in your neighborhood. So we know that those are concerned. But what the data also showed was that anxiety has increased by 25%. And this is worldwide. So I felt that not only was I seeing that in my clinical work, but it felt like that was important to hone in on because many people don't realize they're anxious. They may be sleeping poorly. They may be getting up with gut issues. They may have nausea and they think, oh, it's because I haven't eaten or I had the wrong thing for lunch. But it actually could be that they're severely anxious and they don't recognize it. So anxiety can mask many different conditions. And calming your mind is really about helping people understand the science behind what is going on in the brain and body. But what are the things that you can do to change it? What are the foods you can lean into? What type of protocol can you follow? And it's meant to be simple. It's meant to be something that any one of us can do. The other reason why this book was important was there is a high number of people who need help and not enough doctors and clinicians and therapists. There are wait lists even for telehealth. So while waiting to see a doctor, now let me be clear, if it's an emergency, you should go to your emergency room, you should see a doctor, you should reach out. But if you're just struggling along on your own and you're thinking that maybe you want to do something while you're waiting for that therapy appointment or that doctor's appointment, you can always work on how you're eating because nutritional lifestyle and metabolic psychiatry fills that gap. And you can work on these things on your own, at your own pace, use the protocol in the book, or just try to give up some unhealthy habits and start there. And that was the other reason it was so powerful.
So give us the stack almost. I think people go into the doctor, they get diagnosed with hypertension, and they leave and they know, all right, I should consider this medication. I should do a DASH diet or try to reduce my sodium. I should eat more plants. I should drink more water. What do you wish was like the standard takeaway? All right, I just got diagnosed with anxiety. Here's the 5 things my doc told me to do.
Let me think about it, answering this in 2 ways. So the one overarching protocol that any one of us can go to is swap, eat, and walk. Okay, and what I mean by this is swap one unhealthy food that you're worried about. Maybe you began eating more ice cream during the pandemic. Maybe it's some other food that's bothering you, and you know that it's not the best thing, but your cupboards are stocked with it, or your freezer is, and you can keep eating it. Swap or switch it for a healthier version. For ice cream, it could be the banana-based ice cream made entirely from fruit, and you can even have chocolate flavor. That's in the recipes from my first book. The next one is eat. So I want you to really embrace food. I don't want you to feel you have to give up things. I want you to add more plants to your diet, add more fiber, add a diversity, add in those omega-3 fats. Make sure that you're having clean proteins. Make sure that you're eating a little bit of healthy whole grains. Don't give up foods, just add more in, but healthier whole foods, and really start to cut back or give up the sort of processed, ultra processed foods, the junk foods and the fast foods, because those are not helping you. And the W walk is really for embracing exercise, outdoor time, breath work, yoga, meditation. It's all of those things that also help anxiety. So I want people to remember food is the most important pillar, but there are these other things. So it's always sort of eat more and then walk to represent that. But if it were just specifically down to foods, I would say the things that people really overlook are simple things like adding a diversity of plant foods to their diet just to expand the diversity that's reaching their microbiome, improving the fiber in their diet. Many Americans, most, in fact, don't eat enough fiber. Simply doing that, it doesn't mean they shouldn't eat a piece of chicken or steak, eggs or tofu, whatever their preference for protein may be. But these are healthy norms that we should learn to follow because we are so used to not eating the orange and drinking the store-bought orange juice and thinking that of that as a healthy habit. Not eating the vegetables and thinking we can drink a glass of vegetable juice and that's going to suffice for the vegetable servings in a day. So just adjusting those habits becomes super important. Another one is the pharmacy that's in our kitchen, using spices and herbs. These have rich antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. They flavor your food. If you're buying pure spice, but not a blend, it's pretty much 0 calories. So it's an easy thing to do. And the other for anxiety, believe it or not, is hydration. Because when you're dehydrated and you're not drinking enough liquids, you can even become not only severely anxious, but I've seen people develop panic. So I think that just some simple ways to get started, a way to walk your way towards calm. And then when you are in a place where you can absorb more and feel less overwhelmed, there's just a short protocol that you can follow that walks you through recipes, a shopping list, and a way to help yourself feel calmer.
Wonderful. So I know the question we're going to get asked is how much do I hydrate? Because there's a lot of things online. Is it 64 ounces a day? Is it 120? Right? Like, how do people figure out how much they should drink?
Right. So this is where body intelligence comes into it as well. And there are studies that are refuting nutritional science is like this all the time. It's really not 64 ounces a day or 8 glasses. That was proven or misproven. I think it's important to understand that we need to have, I would say, 5 to 8 glasses of water in a day is what has been tried and tested by my patients over years. And making sure that you maybe switch out things like soda, which are not good for you, and as well as diet soda or juices, which could be laden in sugar. Just have water. Sip that throughout the day. It could be a calming tea, a green tea, a passion flower tea that I talk about in my book. These are things that can help you hydrate, especially if you're not adding in ultra processed cream and tons of sugar and that kind of stuff. So I would say it varies for different people. If you have certain kidney conditions, for example, you definitely need to work with your doctor to understand what and how you should hydrate. But if you're otherwise healthy, then you make sure that you're drinking enough water and making sure that if you're perspiring a lot and it's summer and you realize that you might be losing a lot of your hydration through perspiration, for example, just make sure you're drinking more. And that's just a good kind of sensible guidance for people to follow.
You mentioned seeing panic related to dehydration. And I love to hear case studies on this podcast and just people's clinical experience because I think much of our audience, a lot of them are physicians, but a lot of them are really educated lay people who have read a ton, but don't have the clinical experience of seeing it work. So, do you have a story of someone who had anxiety who you worked on their hydration and they actually saw improvement?
More than one, but the one that I think I'll share is someone who, one of the things that had changed in her life is that she had been struggling with growing up as a child due to a physical condition, recurrent urinary tract infections. And because of her condition, she had somehow gotten into this habit of not drinking much water because she was experiencing pain when she went to the bathroom. And over time, this had been treated, the condition had been corrected, but it had been a habit that stuck with her. And so she presented to me really talking about anxiety and newfound panic attacks that she had been experiencing. And, it was it was a bit of a puzzle to me because I went through her diet. I'd asked her to fill in some paperwork beforehand. Didn't strike me that she was an unhealthy eater. And I kept looking and thinking, she seems to be doing the right things. She's not on a medication that should be doing this. But then I sort of asked her, and this is why it's so important, not only to integrate clinical work with research, but to talk to individuals, whether it's on Zoom or in person, because you have to hear what someone says in order to be able to help them. And one of the things she said is when I came to a simple question as part of my evaluation in terms of water, she said, I drink a glass of water in the morning. And I stopped and I was taking notes and I waited for more. So I kind of looked at her and she looked at me puzzled. Remember, she had done this since childhood, and I guess doctors might have told her something different, but she didn't occur to her because she was otherwise fine. And I said, yes, and then do you carry a water bottle? And she said, no. And I realized that what she was doing, she was getting up in the morning, having something for breakfast, having a glass of water, and for her, that was it. Now, did she appear dehydrated? No. She was otherwise healthy. She didn't appear dehydrated. Her skin probably lacked some turgor, but she didn't appear parched or anything like that because her body had adjusted over time. The body is an amazing, amazing thing. It adjusted to however she had lived these, say, prior decade of her life, prior to her ending up in my office. And so I talked to her about it, and then I went through the full history and I said, well, I'll tell you the one most striking thing about this is you seem to be, yeah, there are a few tweaks with your diet. There are a few things where you probably don't realize the amount of sugar you're consuming in the fruited yogurts that you're eating. And we can easily switch that out. And I'll show you how to have a plain yogurt with berries and cinnamon and other things. But here's what I think we need to do. We need to, what you're describing, we need to help you slowly and steadily hydrate more each day. So we are going to start with increasing the amount of water. You're going to have 1 glass of water at every meal. And in between, you're going to start to sip these calming teas. The calming teas were both for hydration, but the calming effects of things like green tea can be very helpful. And since it was like one of the very early cases I had with this situation, I just thought this would be good for me to see if this can work. And when we did it slowly, she really started to do better because we had to increase her water intake slowly. And part of it was she had this really bad habit. So it took a while. It took probably close to 3 weeks to a month to help her adjust fully. She also realized that when she went to the bathroom, she no longer had pain because that urological condition had been corrected. She wasn't getting urinary tract infections. She wasn't experiencing pain. It was almost a little bit of counseling and therapy that she had to get to say, well, it's no longer happening. So let's look at the reality here. You can go to the bathroom where you work, and when you travel, now there's a clean restroom you can use. So it was fascinating to me. It was fascinating, but it just proved that when you ask a lot of the right questions or you try to uncover what's going on, you might be able to help someone in a very unusual way.
Mhm. Absolutely. So, what do you wish was part of more mental health intakes? So, are there questions that aren't being asked that you have learned to ask that help you very quickly get to the root cause of someone's mental health issue?
Well, for one thing, the way that I practice now is almost a tertiary care setting, meaning that referrals who come to see me are entirely for nutritional, usually to use nutritional lifestyle and metabolic practices to improve their well-being. So I think for me, the missing part is sort of a food as medicine evaluation that looks at what you're eating, what you're drinking, what is your lifestyle, all of those pillars, and an in-depth evaluation of that. Because I think that we are missing opportunities to offer people more solutions through food and lifestyle factors, improving their metabolism through how they eat by not including that in evaluation. Because let me be clear, nutritional work and nutritional therapies in psychiatry and mental health are very nascent. So people are not practicing this way. And the only way to improve is to start to include this in a more holistic way in what we're doing.
So, you've mentioned a couple times metabolic psychiatry. What do you mean when you say that?
Sure. So we've come to understand that metabolic health is sort of intricately related to mental health. And we understand that because the brain is certainly the organ that we identify with mental health. The brain, how it functions in terms of its energy and its energy sources, and how really, as I like to say to people, if your brain doesn't function, the rest of you doesn't work. We also now understand that how we eat, the impacts of one of the things I talk about in my new book is leptin resistance. There's a great example of you eat poorly, you upset the balance of your leptin hormone. This is the hormone that tells you that you're satiated and that now you've eaten enough and you can stop eating. It starts to misfire really because you develop leptin resistance. Then you don't realize that after that first plate of food that you're satiated and you're fine. You probably don't need more food. You start eating second plate of food, or you're looking for snacks and extra foods after your lunch or after your dinner. These things have helped us understand that when your metabolism is awry, you can have an uptick of symptoms like anxiety. And studies in individuals, say with type 2 diabetes, where there has been work done through diet to help improve their metabolic condition underlying diabetes, has also been shown to improve anxiety. So it's really just an important thing for us to keep as part of this discussion. I believe that the overarching nutritional principles, the overarching lifestyle practices are just as important. So I feel like it's all of these things.
Yeah, it's rare to hear someone bring up leptin in a conversation about mental health. And so Are you measuring leptin, or what kind of clues would you use, maybe in someone's blood work, to clue you into the fact that they may have some issues with leptin?
So some of it actually comes from checking on their metabolic panels, looking to see if they have an issue with their metabolic health, working with their primary care physician, sometimes a diabetologist to figure out if they are already struggling, maybe with things like satiety, they have other abnormal levels of endocrine hormones, or they even symptom wise are talking about I used to eat this plate of food, my favorite, say, salmon dinner, and now I feel like I need that second salmon fillet, or I need 3 bowls of ice cream after dinner. It's usually something that we can either observe clinically because of you take a careful history, or family member notes. My husband or my wife or my partner used to eat this amount. Now I'm just noticing that I have to prepare more food. Sometimes it's as simple as that, but also it could show up in their metabolic panel. It could be a clue as to something going on. And you take the proper history, you work with the primary care to get a deeper set of either labs or evaluation done to come to the root cause of this and trying to see what you can do to improve it. This is where diet is very powerful because, say, you take that premise, so you've gotten to diagnostic conclusion with the colleague that you're working with. Diet is powerful because making those dietary adjustments over time can help someone really reverse that leptin resistance.
And so, what's the relationship between leptin resistance, insulin resistance, and the symptom of anxiety for someone who's thinking, "Ugh, I know I need to eat better, and that kind of does sound like me. I do need those carbs or that sweet treat after dinner, but I don't understand the science that actually connects all of them." Is there a catchphrase you use to kind of describe that to people?
It turns out that the amygdala and hippocampus are in the brain definitely associated with anxiety, but it is also a part of the brain that deals with metabolism. So the way that I simply frame it to someone is the parts of your brain that are directly related to anxiety are also the parts of your brain that are linked to could either be healthy or unhealthy eating. So if you right now are struggling with anxiety and you know that your go-to has become the fast restaurant at lunchtime because you've transitioned back to the office and it's thrown off your schedule and that's the only thing you can do, and you've done this for a month and you're feeling like unbounded anxiety after you eat lunch every day or every evening as you're getting home, maybe one of the things we need to do is work on your metabolic health through what you're eating, clean up your diet a little bit, lean into those healthier whole foods versus fast foods, including lifestyle factors, exercise, outdoor time, breath work, many different things. But at the cornerstone of that, adjust your diet and look to see if we can help you that way. So sometimes it's a slow and steady process of realizing it's a marathon and not a sprint, that making those dietary adjustments, especially not overwhelming someone and giving them a list of 10 things to do, that becomes important too. And also something that I learned as I practiced this way, that you give people bite-sized information that they can take action upon becomes hugely important as well.
So, how do you advise people to eat to balance leptin? I know that's a key part of calm your mind with food.
I think the first thing to do is to think about the anti-anxiety shopping list and the protocol that goes with that. So if they're struggling with anxiety and we sense or we figured out and we've diagnosed that there's a problem with leptin, a simple thing is how can you use those foods to really hone in on nutrients that you need to help quell anxiety. And some of the overarching principles are what I talk about in terms of the 6 pillars to calm your mind. And some of those are magnifying your micro and macronutrients, really improving the omega 3s and healthy fats in your diet, eating the whole foods versus the processed foods, having people be guided by certain principles which will naturally help them improve their mental well-being, eating the colors of the rainbow. All of these things become very important as guiding principles because you may not remember, well, cruciferous vegetables and that family of vegetables are rich in sulforaphane, and those phytonutrients are really important to help calm the mind. They're really super helpful for anxiety. But you might remember, let me eat more green vegetables or let me eat the color of the rainbow. That I find is easier for people to remember. But then they have the book, they have the protocol, and the anti anxiety shopping list that they can take with them to really try the protocol. Even for, I usually say to my patients, try one day at a time. Just practice one day and see if you can get that right. Repeat a couple of those meals and see how you do. And then build it up from there. Because even for a lot of people, even 7 days can feel overwhelming.
You also mentioned some things like ashwagandha, vitamin C. Are there non food on your plate sources of nutrients that you recommend to your clients? And if so, how do you suggest that they incorporate those?
Yes, so ashwagandha is a root used for eons in Ayurvedic medicine, but it has a significant number of human trials showing that it helps anxiety. Now, having had some Ayurvedic practitioners in my family, I tasted this as a kid, and it's very bitter. It's not worth trying to get some food source of it. It's just better as a capsule or pill or some form where you don't have to taste it. But it's actually a good option for anxiety. So if you feel that you need a little bit more that can enhance, say, the dietary changes that you're making, it's a good option. Saffron is an herb which is quite expensive, very delicious, and we don't use a lot of it when we cook. So, for culinary use, the amount that was used in clinical trials tested on humans was a larger amount of saffron in the form of a supplement. But saffron has a good amount of evidence for both depression and anxiety. So, there's another time that you might speak to a practitioner about getting a supplement for that. Vitamin C, hugely important. For one thing, I love the interaction of vitamin C with extra dark natural chocolate, which is the highest source of plant based iron. And 30% of the world has iron deficiency. And many people don't realize that this is very common in women and children. And it is therefore also associated with anxiety. But the iron needs vitamin C for absorption. So it's a great pairing to have, citrus fruit with a piece of extra dark natural chocolate to help along those levels. So vitamin C pops up in lots of different places and I think is helpful as a vitamin to think about, as well as your B vitamins, which are hugely important for the brain to think about for anxiety.
I love that. How do you recommend that people start to incorporate these? Because so many people hear about something on a podcast, they go to Amazon, they buy the supplement, they start taking it. But it's a little more technical than that, right? Usually you're recommending a certain dose or a certain brand or a certain amount to take per day. So when it comes to vitamin C, for example, is there a general range or type of supplement you suggest people consider if they want to do something other than the citrus fruit?
Yeah, so I think that this is where the protocol and the guideline in the book is helpful. And the reason I say that is I want people to make sure that they're consulting with their doctors. And I want people to not feel isolatedly that it's just one thing they should do. I can say for vitamin B9 or folate, just eat lots of leafy greens. But it's not just that, right? It's that in association with all the other nutrients that you need. So, what I'd rather people do is understand that vitamin C, ashwagandha, saffron, different things that I've spoken about, passion flower tea for that matter, are different almost parts of the same orchestra. And you want to help your anxiety by having this orchestra really function together and produce a beautiful symphony to help calm your mind. So I think that while I think some nutrients are hugely important versus others, thinking about it that way, looking at the protocol, seeing if your doctor agrees with you taking this dose. A great example is grapefruit juice or fresh grapefruit, which I usually recommend over the juice, but grapefruits interact with the liver enzyme system and can adjust the levels of medications in your body. So even a healthy food like a grapefruit can be unsafe for someone on certain medications. So the reason, I don't say it lightly when I say speak to your doctor, speak to your clinician about it. It's about guiding people, but having the solid science, the advice with the protocols in the book itself.
So you mentioned in your This Is Your Brain on Food book, your literal title in the ADHD section was ADHD, gluten, milk, and polyphenols. And I was struck by the fact that you chose those three things to put in your title. And I'm curious why you did that. I think most people will be surprised to hear that gluten and dairy are related to ADHD.
Mhm. So part of it was based on the good research and the fact that we understand that these specific foods, I tend to be inclusive and not eliminating of foods. And the reason is that people feel restricted and then they don't feel they can follow a plan if they have to give up an entire food group. But research showed that, for example, with types of dairy, if people have ever seen a new type of milk or newer type of milk called H2 milk, it's because they've learned to eliminate certain of the proteins that make it more easier for people who have these problems to drink that type of milk. Now, that's if you consume dairy. If you don't, then it's not an issue for you. I have a recipe in my second book for hemp milk, which you can literally make on the fly, and it's super easy for anyone to do, and it's an alternative to dairy. And with gluten, a lot of people may have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And so they may not even realize they may not have full on celiac disease, but they may have the sensitivity. And studies showed some association between that and problems with focus and attention. So I think it was specifically placed in the title to alert people that these are things you should be concerned about or be thoughtful about and maybe cut back on to see if you have an improvement in symptoms.
hmm I love that you included that. And I agree. I was really struck reading that list of the non-celiac gluten intolerance symptoms to see inattention and issues with attention so high on the list, whereas gastrointestinal symptoms were actually lower, which I think is not the way people tend to think of a non-celiac gluten intolerance. You think, well, of course they're going to have severe stomach issues and that's going to be their only symptom, right? And often it's other symptoms elsewhere in the body, hidden in other systems, that it really does take an expert to guide you through and help you figure out if this could be affecting you. And so I love that you wrote about that. I also noticed in your insomnia and fatigue section, you specifically called out anti-inflammatory diets, capsaicin, chamomile. Why would an anti-inflammatory diet or capsaicin be related to insomnia and fatigue?
One of the things that people are struggling with, especially since COVID, is just these almost abnormal sleep patterns, so much so that insomnia has been called coronasomnia. But we know that one of the through lines in several mental health conditions is inflammation. And we know that one of the ways inflammation is impacted is through our diet. So, a safeguard is eating anti inflammatory foods and including anti inflammatory spices and other things, healing teas in your diet all of the time. These fend off the inflammation that is being set up and could be offsetting your patterns of sleep. One of the things that happens is when people are sleeping poorly, their metabolism can be impacted and they start to have sometimes unhealthy eating patterns because their sleep is thrown off. So, if it's one thing I want to be able to do with my books, it's connect the brain not as an above the neck concept, but as being in concert with the rest of the body. The gut, other parts of the body, from the adrenals to your toes to your joints to everything. But where it becomes important is that anti inflammatories really fend off potentially the gut inflammation, which could be upsetting. For example, it could be upsetting the gut and have an imbalance in the gut because the gut, one of the basic functions is sleep and circadian rhythm. And circadian rhythm is your internal body clock. So if you are inflamed, if you're eating in a way or are stressed in a way that is causing dysbiosis in your gut, one of the connections is by eating these anti inflammatory foods, you are fending off the inflammation. You are helping get your gut hopefully into a better balance. And naturally, the functions of those trillions of microbes, one of their many functions is sleep and circadian rhythm, along with vitamin production, hormone production, immunity, mental well being, infection control, and more. So it's a way that I want to reframe things for people so that they don't just think, oh, caffeine is what's going to affect. Of course, caffeine can definitely impact sleep, but it's not just that, it's a lot of other things too. But also providing solutions as to what they can eat.
Yeah. What are things you're looking for in a either like a comprehensive data stool analysis or if you're looking at the microbiome that would be related to circadian rhythm? Are there certain short chain fatty acids? Are there certain strains of probiotics? Like what's the actual chemical link between the gut and its influence on circadian rhythm?
The way that I understand the science and where the science is at right now is that, for one thing, the microbes have their own circadian rhythm, which I think is just fascinating. That on its own is fascinating. But the way that I understand is that the more times that we are producing healthier breakdown products, right? And so the microbes, on days that we're eating fast foods, the bad microbes have the breakdown products, which are toxic polysaccharides and are more damaging and inflammation producing in the gut. But the times that you're leaning into those colorful vegetables and healthy fats and a better balanced diet, the breakdown products are short chain fatty acids like butyrate, for example, which really fend off inflammation and are healthy and helpful to the gut. Now, the microbes are these little factories almost doing all of this. So they are intricately related to the formation of these either positive substances or more toxic substances, because the toxic substances conducted or taken care of by the less helpful, more negative microbes that also reside in the gut. And herein is that connection to whether it's sleep or circadian rhythm, because if the wrong substances are produced, you are offsetting your circadian rhythm that way. I think that there's probably a lot more to it, but I think that mostly people want to understand how it is that their diet is impacting their sleep. And for me, that's one way to convey the information. But I bet if I was a sleep specialist, their actual thinking about the bacteroides we mentioned when we talked about anxiety, there might actually be other specific colonies that are involved in sleep as well.
So you have a couple of articles that you've written in addition to your books, and one of them was just on magnesium. Like, so can magnesium help with anxiety? I think a lot of folks have heard of magnesium and that it can help. Was it something that you felt like was as important to talk about as the microbiome when it comes to calm?
Magnesium is hugely important, and it's hugely important because so many Americans are low or deficient in magnesium. And I'm not sure if it's just the diet that we eat or what the reason is. So I felt it was something, it's one of those supplements that if people are not, say, getting enough through food, is something to consider supplementing. But magnesium does so much in the body that it's another one where you have to use a preparation that's targeting anxiety specifically.
Yeah. Okay. You talk about potassium too, and I feel like that's a mineral we don't discuss a lot in general health and particularly in mental health. What's your take on potassium? What does it do for mental health and how can we get it through food?
Mhm. So, there are lots of food lists, especially in This Is Your Brain on Food. One of the things I did is I break down the different micronutrients and where they can get it. So you can, of course, take potassium as a supplement, but it also is available in foods and it's found naturally. Well, for one thing, it deals with bone health, it helps with cardiovascular disease, it's important in hypertension. The reason I say that is some of the medications that people take are actually adjusting the levels of these micronutrients and minerals in the body. But food sources can be things like beans and lentils, squash, spinach, broccoli, avocado, bananas. So I think that potassium certainly can be obtained in that way. Now, I think that all of this potassium is also related to things like the muscle contraction and relaxation. So, a deficiency of potassium can lead not only to fatigue, but to things like muscle cramps or weakness and other things. Also, by the way, things like irregular heart rate. If you have a low potassium in the body called hypokalemia, you can actually have an irregular heartbeat. So, these things are also important. Toxicity of potassium is important as well. So, definitely it's not necessarily a supplement to be taking without discussing it with your doctor, given it deals with the cardiovascular system and other things. But when it comes to muscle relaxation and contraction, it becomes important there. And we know that if you think about a time when you were super anxious and you tense, you feel the tension in your body and in your muscles. So just a way to think about where it's interacting on a cellular level with the body. And it's offering you, when you have enough of this nutrient in your body, it's allowing for the natural relaxation of your muscles and it can help you therefore with anxiety. Because a lot of my patients will talk about having clenched fists when they waked up or tension in their muscles when they're feeling anxious sitting at their desk at work. So it's a way to think about these foods.
This is the Root Cause Medicine podcast. We're talking to root cause practitioners who are going to want to know, what is the lab screening panel? If you had to see patients and you couldn't even talk to them, no intake, no nothing, what's the blood labs panel or the stool testing? What would you use to assess their body to try to very quickly identify the root cause of their mental health issue? Do you have a quick list for folks?
I would send them to Rupa Health.
That's very sweet. But I'm thinking, like, for a stool test, maybe like CBC, CMP, vitamin D. Do you have a top? And because some people can't, for whatever reason, access Rupa, they might be thinking, are these labs I could get at my yearly physical? What could they give me some insight to my nutrient status?
Sure. So, the way that it works is that I work in collaboration with primary care doctors to see their patients. So I would, based on the history that we're taking, really advise them. But often the patient may actually have come in and said, look, I'm not feeling this, I'm having this symptom. And a smart primary care doctor will order the Northeast vitamin D level. We'll check to see what their CBC, electrolytes, basic metabolic health. People often think there's a special test for something. I'll tell you that there are many tests we can get done, but a lot of that is based on a good history. And one of the things I spend a lot of time doing is actually talking to my patients and obtaining that proper medical history, but also dietary history to understand what they might need. So just like there isn't a superfood, there isn't one panel that I do for everyone. But since I may not be the person ordering it, and I might be advising the primary care doctor, usually go with a lot of the basic testing. Then based on symptoms, things like iron levels often are missed, right? We don't realize someone is iron deficient. That's a big one. Someone may have a problem with their thyroid and they may be experiencing extreme fatigue. And we've missed it and we didn't realize it, or we go back and check it and realize actually they have hypothyroidism and that they need either medication at that point. It's not just food that's going to help. So that becomes an important part of the evaluation and conversation.
Right. Great. Okay. Iron, vitamin D, thyroid, CBC, CMP. I heard a couple there, really good ones. So it sounds like the first step is go to your primary care if you don't even know where to go.
If you don't know where to go, since everyone should at least be trying to see their primary care doctor every year and getting a set of baseline lab tests, getting everything checked from their heart to their lungs to everything. Often a lot of routine testing is done there. But what I like people to tune into is, if you're not feeling good, say you have fatigue or you feel like something is off, speak to your doctor, start the conversation, and suggest that you've heard maybe they may be deficient in something. There might be a mineral, a nutrient that they're deficient in, and see if that test can be done and take it from there. In the Northeast, people may be vitamin D deficient and they may not know it. So that's an important one for people to know about. Having that conversation is really important. I also think this is where the Institute for Functional Medicine and integrated health practitioners is hugely important, because they'll think with you out of the box of the usual CBC, BMP, vitamin D level, or whatever it is. They'll think out of the box, but we can look at this and we can try to find a solution for you.
I love that. You mentioned metabolic psychiatry, so I do want to circle back to that too as we're talking about labs. Some people might think, well, I don't have type 2 diabetes, so I'm fine. But there are some other clues beyond wanting that sweet treat after dinner that we could see in lab work that might indicate that metabolism is a bit off. And I'm thinking things like whether it's insulin or whether it's a cholesterol panel. What are some of the things you tell your patients to keep an eye on or to keep a lookout for when it comes to determining, is everything I'm doing actually working in terms of optimizing my metabolic health?
I define this in my book. Part of what people need to understand is what metabolic syndrome is, because it turns out that about 88% of Americans have some abnormal factor in their metabolic health. And it's something that we definitely want to be paying attention to. Metabolic syndrome basically includes things like insulin resistance, high blood pressure, elevated blood sugars in association with insulin resistance. It may have an abnormal triglyceride level, excess abdominal weight. Maybe you have one of those things you're noticing in yourself. Maybe you're noticing a change in how you're eating. So these things become important to test. Now, your doctor could do a fasting blood sugar to start. They could also check your fasting triglyceride level, so your fasting lipid panel. They might be assessing your blood pressure to see whether they should diagnose you as having hypertension. So, all of these things, I think, work in concert, and you should be thinking about your metabolic health. One of the things that people notice is that their eating patterns have changed. And there's so much talk about type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance. These are things that your doctor can check your fasting blood glucose levels. Your doctor can get tests to see if you may have signs that you have or leaning towards insulin resistance in your body. So I think asking the question and going in feeling empowered to speak to your doctor, speak to the provider that you're seeing, and getting the right tests, and then also feeling empowered to say, well, would you work with me to work on lifestyle measures to see, now if you have a severely elevated blood pressure, your doctor's going to want you to take a medication, and I would certainly suggest taking a doctor's recommendation. But at the same time, if you are just kind of on the border of some of these conditions and you have the ability to lose some weight and exercise more and do almost a combination of lifestyle factors, these can be very powerful as well. So I want people to feel both empowered to talk to their doctor and advocate for themselves, but also to advocate for the things they can do in addition to traditional allopathic medical treatments.
I'm certainly so glad that you have written the book on using nutritional psychiatry and metabolic approaches in psychiatry to help with anxiety, since anxiety is our number one mental health condition in the US currently. But I want to end with depression, if it's okay with you, because depression can be so heavy and so all consuming that often for our patients who come in with depression, hearing that they have to change their diet or that they have to cook something or that they have to go to the store can really be overwhelming. And so can you give us where's the three places you start with someone who comes in who feels like they can't even get off the couch? How do you work with them in these top three really small ways to get them making progress?
Well, firstly, someone who's so severely depressed or so wrapped or wrought with anxiety that they can't get out of bed for either feeling so depressed or feeling severely anxious, they're not likely to make it to my office. And individuals like that may need a more acute form of care, an emergency visit with a psychiatrist, and family members supporting them getting to an appointment. Now, can food help? Absolutely. It can absolutely help. But if they're able to function up to a certain point, maybe they need friends and family members to step in and help with meal planning, with purchasing food. I might say to them or say to a family member, can the person take a walk to buy the newspaper, buy a cup of coffee, walk the dog to get them out of bed? Is there something they can attach that level of motivation or joy to? Maybe they love their dog. Maybe that's a reason to get out of bed. But sometimes people are so severely depressed that they can't even do that. And that's when emergency care becomes important. And really, it could be an intervention, it could be ECT, it could be an acute form of treatment that's needed at that point. But there's always a way to engage friends and family members and get community support for the person, as long as they're not completely isolated, which happens as well, in which case it's even more problematic.
Okay, so step one I'm hearing is if you're that depressed, you may need a higher level of care. So let's get into the support. If they've done it and they said, okay, well, now I'm ready to come in. What's the next two small changes you tend to focus on, whether it's in terms of nutrition or lifestyle that you see make a major difference for people with depression?
Two things that are huge are swapping out one thing that is bothering them about, say, an unhealthy habit. Maybe it's that they've picked up diet soda during the pandemic. Maybe it's that they are drinking an energy drink because they feel low in energy. But maybe that they just sort of stocked up on cookies from the beginning of the pandemic when some grocery store shelves were empty, and they stayed in the kitchen cabinet and they keep getting replenished miraculously every single month. So it's a habit like that someone has awareness, and that's key. Because if they have awareness, that means it's reached that level of consciousness. So they know it's an issue, but they just may not know how to switch or change from it. So they kind of going back to that habit and eating that cookie or whatever it is. And that then it becomes replacing it with a healthy alternative. What can you stock up in your fridge? Can you give these cookies away, or can you get rid of them so they're not in your environment, but you are finding healthy apples on the counter or a piece of clementine or a piece of extra dark chocolate in your culture? How can you switch these things out? It's important for the person to identify that habit, because if they've identified it, it shows me the motivation that they want to change it. And then it's less hard to institute options for them. And even once those are instituted, it continues to be a struggle sometimes to get and change that habit. But the moment that someone is able to, they turn a corner emotionally and psychologically, because simple things like sleep improves, or they feel less anxious, or they thinking more clearly, they have more focus. And then they want to know 9 other things that they can do. And that's when we can really institute more steps for them to take. But that first step is really pivotal. And the second thing is building in some form of lifestyle measure. Maybe it's a simple breath work exercise. Maybe it's taking a walk every day. Maybe it's spending 10 minutes of outdoor time in daylight, which allows for 80% of your vitamin D. And low vitamin D is associated with both anxiety and depression. And then, of course, put on your sunblock or your sunscreen. It might be a simple lifestyle hack that they can do that can be quite life-changing. So just those 2 things are a good way to get someone started.
I love it. We like to end our podcast with asking, what is the number one thing you want people to take away from this? And actually, because you are a psychiatrist who trains other doctors, I want to ask you to do 2 things, if you don't mind. One, for the doctors who are listening, for the mental health professionals who are listening, what do you want them to hear? And then we'll talk to the people who are listening who aren't doctors, but let's start with them.
So I think with mental health professionals or providers who are seeing individuals in mental health, please understand that there's a real connection between food and our mood. And what we eat impacts our emotional health. And it's no longer soft science that we need to be shy or scared about. There's real mounting evidence and ongoing research to make this connection. There are a lot of resources out there to study and learn about this. And it's up to you whether you want to include this in what I really consider to be the growing food as medicine movement, and that I encourage people to participate in. And for the person listening to this podcast, please know that your mental health is important to your overall health, and you have the power at the end of your fork.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Naidoo, for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Kate.
Yeah, you have an incredible mission. I'm really glad you've written your books and your courses, and we are behind you as you continue to do more to change the world.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to Rupa Health, the best place to order, manage, and track results from over 30 different lab companies in one single place for free. It's going to take you under 2 minutes to sign up, and you can order any functional medicine lab for your client in under 30 seconds. Let me show you how it's done. So here's our beautiful interface. I'm typing in the name of my client, selecting the lab that I want to order for them, and hitting send. From there, Rupa and their amazing team handle the rest. They email the client, collect payment, and even offer an interest-free 3-month payment plan. We've also built the world's largest library of information about chronic health conditions, the lab tests that can help you find the root cause, and the evidence-based interventions that you can use to help people heal from them. It's called the Rupa Health Magazine. There, we have in-depth articles about almost any health condition you can imagine. And we give you step-by-step protocols that other clinicians have used to help their clients heal and that are verified by evidence-based sources. You should totally check it out, and it'll transform your practice. And we can't wait to see you. So make sure you sign up today at rupahealth.com.